The year is 2008. The New England Patriots were coming off the most dominant regular season in NFL history, and the most shocking ending. A perfect 16-0 run, 50 touchdown passes from Tom Brady, and one of the greatest offenses ever assembled. All undone by Eli Manning and the Giants' pass rush in Super Bowl 42. But despite coming off knee surgery, Peyton Manning's presence alone made the Colts just as much of a contender. Also in the second tier of the AFC, the Chargers were once again ready to break through, with LaDainian Tomlinson still producing at an elite level and Phillip Rivers continuing to ascend. San Diego had the talent, but the question remained whether they could put it all together. Meanwhile, the Steelers had built one of the top defenses in football, and with Ben Roethlisberger continuing to make plays in big moments, this was a team built for January. But coming off a 2007 season where they went into Pittsburgh and knocked off the Steelers in the playoffs, many believe this was the year the Jaguars could take the next step. With their two-headed rushing attack of Maurice Jones-Drew and Fred Taylor, they were one of the trendiest Super Bowl picks. But most importantly, after months of retirement talk, emotional press conferences, and constant uncertainty, Brett Favre returned to football, but not in Green Bay. Instead, he was traded to the New York Jets, instantly turning them into one of the league's most fascinating teams. So with Favre gone, the Packers handed the reins to Aaron Rodgers, a talented but unproven quarterback replacing the legend after sitting behind him for 3 seasons. And as champions, the Giants were no longer a feel-good underdog story. With Eli validated and a ferocious defensive front still intact, New York was viewed as a powerhouse. But the NFC East was arguably the most competitive division in football. The Cowboys were coming off a 13-3 season with perhaps the most talented roster in the NFL, led by Tony Romo and Terrell Owens. Donovan McNabb always kept the Eagles in the mix, and the Redskins looked to build off their wildcard appearance. In the 2008 draft, the Falcons selected Matt Ryan 3rd overall to succeed Michael Vick, but 15 picks later, the Ravens took a shot on Delaware quarterback Joe Flacco, hoping for their first true franchise QB in the team's short history. And the Cardinals, having finally turned the page from Matt Leinart to the veteran Kurt Warner, weren't viewed as favorites, but with one of the most explosive passing attacks in football, they had the pieces to surprise. Week 1 of 2008 kicked the season off with a real buzzkill. The Patriots took the field expecting to pick up right where they left off and chase redemption. But just minutes into their opener against Kansas City, Tom Brady dropped back and was hit low by Bernard Pollard, suffering a torn ACL. His season over before the conclusion of the first quarter. So thrown into the spotlight was Matt Cassel, a quarterback who hadn't started a game since high school in 1999. Expectations were non-existent, but New England adapted quickly, grinding out wins and staying competitive until Week 3 against Miami. Because the Dolphins were popularizing a revolutionary offensive strategy built around direct snaps and misdirection called the Wildcat. With Ronnie Brown taking snaps, he scored 4 touchdowns and combined for over 200 yards rushing with Ricky Williams to blow out the Patriots 36-13. Still, exiting September 2-1 after losing the best player in franchise history showed New England wasn't just going away. But while the AFC adjusted to life without Tom Brady, a new power emerged. The Titans stormed out of the gate 4-0, holding teams to 12 points per game, and rookie running back Chris Johnson brought a level of speed never seen out of the backfield before, forming a thunder and lightning type duo with the powerful Lendale White, and giving Tennessee a physical identity that no one wanted to deal with. But they weren't the only surprise. The Bills also jumped out to a 4-0 start, somehow lighting up the scoreboard with Trent Edwards at QB, while Atlanta's new running back Michael Turner immediately justified his massive free agent contract. In his Falcons debut against Detroit, Turner exploded for 220 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, setting himself up for a monster season on a team far more dangerous than anyone expected. And if you wanted a glimpse of just how brutal the AFC North was, look no further than Week 4 in Pittsburgh, where the Steelers and Ravens went to war in a 23-20 Steelers win. Big hits, defensive stands, and late-game execution birthed a rivalry for the ages, with Big Ben leading a game-winning drive in overtime. The Cowboys were as advertised, 3-1 thanks to a monster September for the Romo-T.O. connection and a shootout win against Philly in Week 2. But the Giants were 4-0 after blowing out the Seahawks 44-6 in Week 4. And in the same stadium, every Jets game was unpredictable with Brett Favre under center. A 1-2 start led them to Week 4 where they hosted Arizona. Having thrown 6 touchdowns entering the game, Favre doubled his total with another 6, tossing 3 touchdowns to Lavernius Coles in a 55-35 win, leaving everyone with an exciting cliffhanger heading into their Week 5 bye. After dominating the Chiefs and Colts, the Titans hosted Aaron Rodgers in Week 9. A defensive slog ensued, and Rob Baronis kicked the game winner in overtime to reach 8-0. Meanwhile, the Colts and Jaguars each sat behind them at 3-4, despite one of the best comebacks of Peyton Manning's career against the Texans in Week 5. But the NFC North was wide open. The Bears and Packers, both 4-3. Chicago's defense, led by Brian Urlacher, remained the identity of the team. But offensively, the limitations of Kyle Orton made it difficult to pull away from opponents, though they did best Minnesota in an unexpected 48-41 Week 7 shootout. But through Aaron Rodgers' first 7 starts, the results were promising but mixed. Rodgers showed flashes of elite arm talent and mobility, proving he belonged as a starting QB. But a 3-game losing streak kept them from taking control of the division. At the top of the NFC South, though, were the Panthers. A running back committee featuring DeAngelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart wore defenses down and opened up the field for Jake Delhomme to not capitalize on it most of the time. But with a shutdown defense through the first half of the season, Carolina was 6-2. And in second place were the Bucs, built in a very similar mold. Strong defense and a veteran presence at QB in Jeff Garcia. After a 13-9 loss to the Cowboys, they were 5-3. But the AFC West was one of the worst divisions in football. The Chargers' talented roster wasn't translating to wins in the early going. After losses to the Bills and Saints, they were 3-5, 1.5 games behind the 4-3 Broncos, whose offense, led by Jay Cutler, could put up points in bunches on any given Sunday, so their defense was the reason they weren't running away with the division, evidenced by their 41-7 loss to New England in Week 7. In Week 10, the undefeated Titans finally met their match. In the Meadowlands, the Jets made one of the biggest statements of the season, handing Tennessee their first loss 34-13. This was the Jets' 5th straight victory in a stretch that included wins over the Chiefs, Bills, Rams, Patriots, and Titans. Having beaten 2 of the conference's top teams in back-to-back weeks, New York was arguably the best team in the AFC. But the NFC still had a clear king, as the Giants rolled through November, improving to 10-1, highlighted by a Week 10 Sunday night showdown with the Eagles, where Brandon Jacobs ran them to a high-scoring victory with 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. But on November 28th, everything changed when star receiver Plaxico Burress accidentally shot himself in a Manhattan nightclub, abruptly altering the vibe and trajectory of the Giants' season. The Steelers took on the Colts in Week 10 in a matchup of legendary offense versus legendary defense. But the legendary offense won this time 24-20 as Peyton threw 3 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, while Big Ben threw 0 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Indy was red hot, going undefeated this month. However, Pittsburgh would respond by winning their next 3 games, concluding the month with a 33-10 win over the Patriots to remain in first place at 9-3. But the Ravens weren't going anywhere, having strung together a 4-game win streak from mid-October to mid-November. Meanwhile, with San Francisco in second place in the NFC West at 3-8, the Cardinals were running away with the division. However, the Falcons were turning into a legit playoff threat, taking down the Panthers 45-28 in Week 12 to move within 1 game of first place. And at the bottom of the league, the Lions were still winless 0-12, destined for history. The Jets entered the final stretch riding the momentum of their November surge into Super Bowl contention. But over the final month, injuries caught up to Brett Favre, and the offense stalled at the worst possible time. They went from being one of the hottest teams in the NFL to losing 4 of their final 5 games and dropping out of the playoffs at 9-7. It looked like Favre's career might finally be over. And taking their place was one of the biggest year-over-year improvements in league history. The Dolphins completed a stunning rise from 1-15 to 11-5, capturing the AFC East with their offensive attack built around the Wildcat formation. But just as important was the resurgence of Chad Pennington, who was released by the Jets in August to make room for Brett Favre. He then signed with the Dolphins and revitalized his career in Miami by leading the NFL in completion percentage, winning Comeback Player of the Year, and finishing second in MVP voting, culminating in a Week 17 win over the Jets that clinched the division. The Patriots, left for dead after Week 1, rallied behind Matt Cassel, doing practically everything right. But in one of the strangest outcomes of all time, New England missed the playoffs at 11-5. A reminder that in 2008, nothing made much sense. And nowhere was that more obvious than in the AFC West, where the Chargers and Broncos each stumbled to 8-8 finishes, with the division ultimately coming down to their Week 17 matchup, in which Darren Sproles and LaDainian Tomlinson combined for over 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 52-21 rout. The Titans held on to secure the AFC's number 1 seed at 13-3, and the Steelers 12-4 for the 2 seed. But the team everyone expected all along found its way back. The Colts went from 3-4 to 12-4 as Peyton Manning returned to form, winning his 3rd career MVP. But the Jaguars did not live up to any of the preseason hype at 5-11. And the Giants also responded poorly to the loss of Plaxico Burress, losing 3 of their last 4. But the NFC East wildcard spot came down to a Week 17 Philly-Dallas matchup. The Eagles absolutely dominated 44-6, clinching a playoff spot at 9-6-1. The Panthers powered their way also to a 12-4 record, and the NFC's 2nd seed as DeAngelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart combined for over 2,300 yards rushing and 30 total touchdowns. But the Vikings had a pretty good running back of their own. Winners of 5 of their last 6, Minnesota leaned on Adrian Peterson and a defense that hit its stride late in the year. Peterson finished his monster sophomore campaign with nearly 1,800 yards rushing and carried the 10-6 Vikings to the playoffs despite some of the worst QB play in the NFL, beating out Chicago and Green Bay. The Falcons completed one of the fastest rebuilds in recent memory as an 11-5 wildcard with Rookie of the Year Matt Ryan, but the engine of Atlanta's turnaround was Michael Turner, who exploded for 1,700 rushing yards and a 3rd-place MVP finish. And in Week 17, Turner steamrolled the Rams for 208 yards to put the icing on his franchise-altering campaign. But the Saints actually had the most explosive offense in the NFL, with Offensive Player of the Year Drew Brees crossing the 5,000-yard mark for the first time. But the league's worst defense held them back all year. So despite all that firepower, they finished in last place at 8-8. The 9-7 Cardinals lost 4 of their last 6, yet still won the putrid NFC West. At 37, Kurt Warner had his best year since his 2001 MVP campaign, throwing for 4,600 yards and 30 touchdowns. And the Lions finished the season 0-16, becoming the first team to ever go winless in a 16-game season. Arizona made 2 big splashes in the first half with a 42-yard Larry Fitzgerald touchdown, then a 71-yard Anquan Boldin score. They then proceeded to lock it down with 2 turnovers and a safety in the second half to win 30-24. Next, San Diego got a career day from Darren Sproles, who dominated in every phase of the game. Peyton Manning connected with Reggie Wayne for a go-ahead 72-yard touchdown in the 3rd quarter, but a late Chargers field goal forced overtime where Sproles finished the job 23-17. After that, the Ravens intercepted Chad Pennington 4 times, highlighted by an Ed Reed pick 6. A balanced offensive effort allowed Baltimore to pull away for a 27-9 victory. Then on Sunday night, Adrian Peterson put the first touchdown on the board with a 40-yard run, but the Eagles responded with a pick 6 from Asante Samuel, and Brian Westbrook delivered the decisive blow with a 71-yard touchdown of his own. To kick off the divisional round, the Ravens once again took a conservative approach and forced 3 Titans turnovers. Tied at 10 late in the fourth quarter, Joe Flacco and Willis McGahee set Baltimore up for the game-winning Matt Stover field goal. Next, the Cardinals capitalized on a disastrous 5-interception performance from Jake Delhomme, while Larry Fitzgerald led the offense with 166 yards and a 29-yard touchdown to advance with a 33-13 victory. Sunday afternoon, the Eagles had a forgettable offensive day, but kept the Giants out of the end zone completely, holding them to just 3 field goals and a safety for the 23-11 win. And lastly, the Chargers and Steelers started in dramatic fashion. A 41-yard Vincent Jackson touchdown, answered by a Santonio Holmes punt return. But from there, Willie Parker's 146 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns propelled Pittsburgh to a 35-24 win, as San Diego just didn't have enough offensive firepower, missing LaDainian Tomlinson due to a groin injury. Arizona stormed out to a commanding 24-6 lead behind Kurt Warner's 3 first-half touchdowns, all of which went to Larry Fitzgerald, who continued his legendary postseason run. In the second half, however, Donovan McNabb threw 3 touchdowns in the span of 7 minutes to take a 25-24 lead. But just when the momentum had shifted, Arizona pieced together a clutch drive to reclaim control in the final minutes, capped off by a Tim Hightower touchdown. A defensive stand sealed one of the most dramatic conference championships in years as the Cardinals advanced to Super Bowl 43. But to determine their opponent, Pittsburgh built a 13-0 lead against the Ravens after a 65-yard Santonio Holmes touchdown. Willis McGahee punched in 2 scores himself to cut it to 16-14, but Troy Polamalu delivered the defining play, a fourth-quarter pick-6 to all but seal the game. Flacco threw 3 interceptions in the hard-fought game, and Pittsburgh advanced 23-14. In the first quarter of Super Bowl 43, the Steelers drove down the field on their opening drive, but Arizona held up at the goal line to keep them to a field goal. After a Cardinals punt, Big Ben connected with Santonio Holmes and Heath Miller on a 7-minute drive to set up a Gary Russell touchdown for a 10-0 lead. Kurt Warner would immediately counter though, hitting Anquan Boldin for a 45-yard gain, and then Ben Patrick for a 1-yard touchdown. After a punt from each team, then a Roethlisberger pass intercepted by Carlos Dansby, the Cardinals had the ball back at the Steelers' 34 with 2 minutes remaining in the first half. But with Arizona threatening to take the lead, Kurt Warner took a snap out of the gun and fired a quick pass to the goal line that was intercepted by James Harrison, who took it the length of the field 100 yards for a touchdown. A 14-point swing that gave Pittsburgh a 17-7 halftime lead, one of the greatest plays in Super Bowl history. The third quarter was mostly uneventful, but a long Steelers drive and another field goal stretched their lead to 20-7. In the fourth quarter, though, Arizona found life. Warner shifted into a no-huddle rhythm, dicing up the Steelers' defense with short passes and a touchdown to Larry Fitzgerald, his 4th catch of the drive, which cut the lead to 1 score with 8 minutes left. Then, following 2 more punts, Pittsburgh was pinned at their own 1-yard line, and a holding penalty in the end zone resulted in a safety. Now down 4 points with 3 minutes left, Fitzgerald caught a slant and broke free for a 64-yard touchdown, sprinting down the middle of the field to give the Cardinals their first lead of the game, 23-20. So with just under 3 minutes left, the pressure shifted to Big Ben on his own 22, who then led one of the most clutch drives in Super Bowl history. 3 completions to Santonio Holmes for a combined 67 yards took Pittsburgh to the Arizona 6. With the game on the line, Roethlisberger rolled right and fired a pass to the back corner of the end zone. Holmes toe tapped, secured the catch, and gave Pittsburgh the lead with 42 seconds remaining. One of the most iconic catches of all time. Arizona had one last chance, but as Warner dropped back for a final attempt, he was strip-sacked, ending the game. In one of the most dramatic Super Bowls ever played, the Steelers survived a furious comeback and delivered the final blow, winning 27-23 and earning Lombardi number 6, the most in NFL history at the time.